Shout out to the quartering. Check this out. This is where I found this today. I've got a nice cache of information. Apparently, T-Mobile employees must complete a white privilege checklist. Oh my goodness. A checklist of white privilege. Of course, he's got more insanity coming on. They must also admit that they are all secretly racist and must take several courses on it. Oh my goodness. Okay. Ridiculous. So here's the list. Oh, well, here's the how to overcome your own unconscious biases and understand how important you are in creating inclusivity and belonging at work with these 4 digital courses. Taking about 20 minutes each, these courses will guide you through identifying the shortcuts your brain takes that might be harmful to others, and then gives actionable recommendations for incorporating more inclusive behaviors in your everyday work. And then this insanity, this is just ridiculous. Here's this white privilege checklist, right? Let me zoom in a little bit so we can see this. Oh my goodness. So I'm just going to read this list to you. Let's see. I can arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Oh my gosh. All right, before we get into this, I just want to remind everybody that it's the human race, right? The human race, we all bleed the same color. I'm so sick of this conversation. Race. Everything's about race. Everything's about your identity of who you identify as something that you cannot change at all. When are we going to get over this? When are we going to get over this? This is ridiculous. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. I am told about our national heritage or civilization. I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. Wow. I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race, my race represented. What is this ridiculousness? What music is white music? What is that? They're obviously talking about white privilege here. So what is it? What is white music? Right? I like good music, right? Obviously I'm a white person, so does that mean I'm not allowed to like certain kinds of music or something? Or I have a specific, is like, because I'm white, is like country music like the thing that I'm supposed to listen to? That's like what represents my skin color? No, it's your cultural. It's the environment I was raised in. That has nothing to do with race. God, this unconscious bias bullshit. I'm sorry, I had to swear because it's ridiculous. This is, I mean, it goes on. And it's ridiculous. And a lot of these things are class issues, cultural issues, have nothing to do with race. Period. I could worry about racism without being seen as self-interested or self-seeking. Who's really self-interested here? I could take a job or enroll in a college with an affirmation action policy without having my coworkers or peers assume I got it because of my race. Or why did Oxford say, well, if you're black, you don't have to work as hard. You don't have to do as much work. That's racism. That's them perpetrating this thing that they're trying to put on whiteness. This is getting ridiculous. This list is absurd. I'm not going to even finish reading it because it just frustrates me, because I'm going to jump right to this article, which is incredible. It sums it up. It's perfect. Unconscious bias training doesn't work, but it's making billions. And that's it. There it is, people. It's all about the Benjamins. Listen to this. It sums it up so well. By now, we've all heard of unconscious bias training programs. Something I just went over. T-Mobile is forcing it on their white workers designed to make us aware of our explicit and implicit biases and to promote diversity in the workplace. What is an unconscious bias training? Unconscious bias training is based on a key assumption within critical social justice theory that we each possess implicit biases. Implicit biases are attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, decisions in an unconscious manner, such as how we perceive individuals of a different race, gender, or sexuality. In aggregate, these individual biases are thought to amount to oppressive structures in society, such as systemic racism, essentially a system of people's unconscious thoughts. In the U.S. alone, companies spend over $8 billion a year in unconscious bias training. $8 billion a year. It is an $8 billion a year industry. Do you get that? Do you understand what this is all about? It's about triggering your emotions and making money off of it. Forcing these big companies to spend all this money to try to perpetuate the problem that they're creating. Oh, it gets into it. This is great. Unconscious bias training aims to help individuals unlearn these biases and change their behavior. These programs can take various forms, but they also often follow 3 basic steps. Participants take a pre-test to assess baseline implicit bias levels, the implicit association test. 2, they complete the implicit bias training task. And 3, they take a post-test to reevaluate bias levels after training. For example, an implicit bias training task may involve imagining powerful women, hearing their stories, and writing essays about them, or pairing counter-stereotypical traits such as successful with images of black individuals. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait a minute. Powerful women like Gina Carano, who is a boss, she got canceled. She's a powerful woman. She speaks her mind. She's open about it. She unapologetically speaks her mind, which she should have every right to do so. They were afraid of her. She got canceled. Successful and black individuals? Well, like, who? Oh, like someone like this, Eddie Murphy? Oh, what's this article about? Eddie Murphy insists he's never faced racism in 40-year career, claims being black in Hollywood has been no issue. That's right. He's like, people, we live in an era of correctedness where people are very sensitive as far as comedy is concerned. It doesn't end just at comedy, Eddie. It goes way beyond comedy. It's all inclusive everywhere. This is infecting the world right now. And people are tuning in. Why? Because of the money. You think Robin DiAngelo really thinks all this stuff? She's just making money. It's all about the money, man. Let's see. How popular is it? In the wake of George Floyd's death, there was a huge increase in demand for these kinds of programs across the West. As you can see, Google searches for unconscious bias spiked dramatically. And of course, it started around 2010, and it gets, it starts going up and up and up after that. Something about media propaganda I've talked about many, many times. I'm not going to get into it. In the U.S. alone, companies now spend over $8 billion a year in unconscious bias training. In 2018, for example, Starbucks closed more than 8,000 stores across the U.S. to complete these programs. Google also introduced 60 to 90-minute unconscious bias training sessions to its employees, while the U.S. State Department of Justice imposed implicit bias training on more than 33,000 of its federal agents and prosecutors. According to a recent report, 81% of companies now run unconscious bias training in the UK. But does unconscious bias training actually work? Good question. And yet hundreds of studies dating back to 1930 suggest that unconscious bias training doesn't actually reduce bias or change behavior. In 2017, meta-analysis looking at 494 studies currently under peer review found that reducing implicit bias doesn't have any significant effect on behavior. And this is a quote, "I was pretty shocked that the meta-analysis found so little evidence of a change in behavior that corresponded with a change of implicit bias. Psychology professor and co-author of the meta-analysis, Patrick Foster, commented, I currently believe that many, but not all, psychologists, in their desire to help solve social problems, have been way too overconfident in their interpretation of the evidence that they gather. The impulse is understandable, but in the end, it can do some harm by contributing to wasteful and maybe even harmful policy. Does it do more harm than good? One university study found that unconscious buying training can actually make individuals more hostile towards other groups. For example, Kawakami, Dovidio, and Van Camp challenged the efficacy of counter-stereotype training after they found an increase in participants' gender bias following training sessions. Using a sample of 2,000 people, Kulik et al. Also found that implicit bias training increased prejudice against older participants. In one study, white individuals were made to read a brochure critiquing prejudice towards black people. When participants felt pressured to agree with it, their bias against people of color actually strengthened. These are studies, right? Recognize that they're doing studies on what this stuff actually does. It increases racism. It's making it worse. It's making it a problem. It wasn't an issue. We were getting over it. Growing up, I was an 80s child. I grew up in the 80s. I'm almost 40, right? I was throughout my schooling years, I had all different colors in my high school, and everyone was cool. It didn't go into my head like what color your skin color. It was if you were cool to me. Period. That's the way it should be. Are you cool? Awesome. Are you not cool? Awesome. Doesn't matter as long as I can figure it out. All right. I'm not adding that your skin color changes. This one skin color wasn't awesome to me, so all of the same skin color are... No, that's not the way it works. Everybody's different. Any human can be cool. Any human can be a dick, right? It's ridiculous. 5 years after instituting required training for managers, companies saw no improvement in the proportion of white women, black men, Hispanics in management. And they go on to explain, and the share of black women actually decreased by 9% on average, while the ranks of Asian American men and women shrank by 4 to 5%. So why doesn't unconscious bias training work? Of course, racism, sexism, and other forms of prejudice exist, but the question is, do they influence our every decision? And can they be unwired from our subconscious simply by a corporate training program? Can we qualify these biases in a meaningful and reliable way to measure exactly how they affect behavior? The results suggest that we can't. Repeatedly, the implicit association test inherent to unconscious bias training produces different scores when participants take the same test numerous times. In fact, the test-retest reliability is so poor that it falls short of scientific standards. They can't even... I'm just going to keep reading. All right. This is likely because the human mind is extremely complex. You don't say. There are thought to be over 200 positive and negative cognitive biases that affect our everyday decision-making and behavior. For instance, our actions can be distorted by perception bias when we believe something is typical of a particular group of people based on cultural stereotypes or assumptions, or affinity bias when we feel as though we have a natural connection with people who are similar to us, or halo effect, when we project positive qualities onto people without actually knowing them, and confirmation bias, when we try and conform our own opinions and pre-existing ideas about a particular group of people. Unconscious bias training tends to focus only on one type of bias, the stereotype bias, while largely ignoring other distortions. To identify a specific unconscious belief among a miscellany of intersecting and complex schemas and unlearn it is an impossible feat. Attitudes aren't really strong predictors of our behavior either. Studies show that there are rarely more than 16% overlap between attitudes and behaviors, and the figure is even lower when it comes to prejudice and discrimination. Therefore, you simply can't predict whether someone will act in a racist or sexist way from their attitudes alone. What's more, the overlap between unconscious attitudes and behavior is even smaller, merely 4%. That means that even if unconscious bias training did change people's attitude, it's likely to change how they behave. They're bringing the studies, all right? This is showing the studies that this stuff doesn't work. In fact, it makes it worse, all right? So when they shove this stuff down your throat, it's people, they don't change. They're only focusing on one part of it. They're not going on the whole thing. They're like, well, it doesn't matter. This is just what we believe. Man, goes on to finish. Well, are there alternatives? Despite a body of evidence suggesting that these training sessions don't produce reliable results and may be harmful, unconscious bias programs are compulsory in many corporations, schools, and other institutions. Fortunately, co-author of the Grievance Studies hoax, Helen Pluckrose, recently announced Counterweight, a new organization providing letter templates for employees to use if they disagree with critical social justice initiatives in their workplace. The letter asks employers important questions such as, how will management calculate the baseline of unconscious bias in the company to assess the efficacy of proposed training in light of poor evidence base for implicit association testing? Counterweight also offers alternative suggestions to combat racism and foster equality in the workplace. For instance, companies could instead promote moral courage, that is, encouraging their employees to speak the truth and potentially engage in disagreements, ensuring viewpoint diversity. They also recommend the Open Mind platform, a curriculum that uses psychological principles to help individuals learn about the morals and values of different cultures, replacing divisive us versus them rhetoric. Yes, different cultures, not different races. I like the way that that's put that, because that's the key there. Everyone has different cultures, and any colored skin could have a different culture. They could be raised in a different environment. I could provide examples, but find it on your own. It's fine. I guess I should do one. I have one of Nisha's best friends was born in India, but she was raised in Sweden. So she's a Swedish Indian, but she's Swedish. She is Swedish in all intents and purposes. Intents and purposes? What is the phrase? Whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's a different culture that she was raised in. Period. It doesn't matter about the skin color, She doesn't look like a classic Swede, but she's Swede. She's a Swedish in all ways. These alternatives provide a form of diversity training without the shame and guilt attached. For instance, Coca-Cola recently promoted the online training course entitled Confronting Racism in association with the author of White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo, who charges anything from $30,000 to $40,000 for a few hours of training. $40,000 for a few hours. What? Because she admits she's racist and that she tells you you're racist and is She's making bank off this. The course features a slide entitled Try to be Less White. I hope you obviously know about that. This article, who wrote this article? This was fantastic. I got to give them props. Freya India, great article, fantastic. And shout out to EV Magazine, because they promote everything I read from them is great. If you don't know about EV Magazine, they're a good magazine. They handle cultural issues and they're straight with it, and it's fantastic. Look, it's showing us that this stuff doesn't work, okay? And it's making the problem worse, okay? It's not a race thing, it's a cultural thing. We got to understand that different people have different cultures. You can't attack one bias without finding out which